Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and it's almost time. Tears of the Kingdom comes out tomorrow. As of this recording, I'm about half a day away before finally getting to play The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It's been a long road, but we are finally here. And so many great things are being said about this game now that reviews have dropped today. We'll be talking about a bit of that, but we'll also be talking about some key points brought up in parts 4 and 5 to this interview of the Tears of the Kingdom development team that's been published by Nintendo. There are some interesting things brought up there as well, so we'll be going over all of that and just my general excitement and hype for this game and my thoughts going into the release. But before we go further, let me point out that we've recently hit our goal to hit 25k before Tears of the Kingdom comes out. We've done it. We've made it. Thank you all who have been a part of this journey. I'm not ready to announce my next goal, but if you do enjoy my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because I talk about Nintendo and Zelda news and theories every day. So let's first get into the reviews. It's a 96 on Metacritic. If you don't know what Metacritic is, it's a site that compiles all of the accredited outlets that have reviewed the game, and it provides an aggregate score so we can compare it across all other games as well. And it's probably the best way to kind of get a gauge of the quality of the game based off reviews. Now, I'll say, when it comes to reviews, I don't really need reviews to tell me if I'm going to enjoy a game or not. Sometimes I just watch them or read them to get a little bit more of an understanding on the game. What someone thinks isn't necessarily what I'm going to think. That all said, of the current 83 that have reviewed the game, they're giving it a 96 overall, which is stellar. That would be the highest reviewed game of the year so far, last I checked. One of the highest reviewed games of all time. It's not above Breath of the Wild, it's at a 97, and Mario Odyssey, it's also at a 97. But 96 is still amazing, and just because it's at a 96, that doesn't mean it's not a better game than Breath of the Wild. People just review things differently depending on the times. That's just how it is. It's not a consistent metric. That said, the content of the reviews, the sentiment that's made by the reviews, is that Tears of the Kingdom is indeed a better game than Breath of the Wild. And I think that's more meaningful here. And it seems like, based off what everyone's saying, that a lot of the concerns people had about Tears of the Kingdom, a lot of them have been addressed. The big fear that this game would feel too samey to Breath of the Wild, you need not worry. This is something that the development team has been focusing on, as we discussed throughout the week from the interviews, and all the reviews are supporting this. The game feels like a fresh new experience. That sense of wonder and discovery you had with Breath of the Wild, you will still have that with Tears of the Kingdom, and potentially even more so, because this game is apparently far bigger, far more dense. There's so much to do in the skies, the vastly changed surface with the caves and new towns and quests that feel really good and fun, and the underground that's apparently an entirely new experience. And it's all seamless. And on that note of seamless, I saw Digital Foundry's video on Tears of the Kingdom, and if you haven't seen it yet, they basically say this game runs surprisingly well. It does look better. It's a little sharper. The lighting seems to work a little bit better from what I've personally seen. There's a lot more variety to the environments. There's a little bit more detail across the board, and it runs fairly well. Are there the occasional frame rate drops? There are in the hectic areas, but those frame rate issues that people were reporting during the preview event, that's been patched. It's been rectified. The game runs well, and the frame rate drops that have been experienced, the way they come don't really seem to be so impactful that it becomes negative. So the game looks great. It's one of the most impressive games on Switch. These are exciting things to hear. The story is strong, the dungeons are varied. They're giving us what we wanted with this game. That's what's being said, and that's all promising. Not going to talk about spoilers here. I've actually tried to avoid most of the spoilers myself, but everything that's being said is just so stellar, and that has me very excited. The size of this game, the quality of this game, the amount of discovery that's left for this game, we really may be looking at the best adventure game ever made. But now let's get into some key points brought up during the Q&A interview with the Tears of the Kingdom development team. From part 4, what makes the game The Legend of Zelda like? I know that breaking the conventions of The Legend of Zelda was a theme behind the previous title. However, it seems that breaking the conventions of sequels was a concept for this title because it's filled with many new elements despite being a sequel. Dota, yes, that's right. As we were having this discussion, I was thinking that if we created the game from scratch in a completely different world, we might have ended up with something with a similar gameplay feel to the last one, just with a different map. Fujibayashi, I think he has a point. We often say that we should create games through multiplication. For example, we believe that taking the main character's ability and multiplying it with the world that has a lot to offer will result in a different experience for every player, every time. For the sequel, as we wanted to keep offering a different experience every time without changing the world that has a lot to offer, it was only natural for us to change the main character's ability and create something new. That's why we completely redesigned Link's abilities. So here they're simply highlighting that the new abilities are vastly different from the abilities in Breath of the Wild, and that really helps us to experience the same world in a very different way. That said, their world is very much changed, as we've already discussed. The surface has so many changes, the sky is totally new, the underground's totally new, but with these new abilities, it facilitates a very different experience, and had they just started from scratch with a new map, as they say, it wouldn't have been quite the same. Building off this sequel, there's something special about it. They can build upon everything, go even further in terms of depth and content, but also give us the opportunity to experience this world in a different way, and that's a fresh experience that you don't really get with most sequels. On to something else. Fujibayashi. Back then, I tried creating vehicles using only the mechanisms and parts available in the previous game and presented them. And I'll be showing the footage they had in the interview here. And basically they're showing off different Sheikah parts being put together to create different vehicles and devices. And what intrigues me about this is that it sort of goes to show how aware they are of what goes through the minds of the gamer. For example, the rafts in Breath of the Wild, I always wondered if we could maybe build them into something bigger, like a boat, or what if we create like a house? And in Tears of the Kingdom, we can do these things. Let's talk about this last part here from part 4. Takizawa. The initial concept of this game was to use the supernatural power of an unknown civilization as opposed to Sheikah civilization's super ancient technology in the previous game. So we decided to create lots of handy items with magical properties. However, even when we describe these items as supernatural, players won't use them unless they know what they are. So this thing we were calling magic ultimately became an electric fan. So I find this funny, but also it's interesting kind of getting to the minds of the developers here. They initially were thinking about using kind of like a magic meter. They wanted to kind of go back to the magic meter, but this evolved into the little battery things that we see representing the energy of these new magical items. And a lot of these magical items are basically just like really cool futuristic devices or modern devices like rockets and fans and things of that nature. And the overall sentiment I'm seeing with this particular interview is that they came up with a lot of solutions that at first may have not seemed like it would fit within the conventions of Zelda, but they designed it in a way where a lot of it would, but there is this balance of something feeling epic and magical while also being comical. And what's cool about the Zelda series is that it's both. There are moments of comedy and wonkiness, but there's also these moments of epic vastness and cool, magical, surreal environments and plot points. And from everything we're seeing, it's all coming together quite nicely. But on to part 5. If players think they can do it, they can. You mentioned that every player will have a different experience with this game. However, given this degree of freedom, some of the abilities may be used in ways contrary to the developer's intentions. Do you have any concerns about that? Fujibayashi: I wouldn't worry too much about that. The programmers have made sure these features won't cause issues on the system side, and the gameplay is designed so that players can freely create whatever comes to mind, just like an experiment. We'd rather our players surprise us by creating something we've never even thought of. So what's fascinating about this is that 1, they are confident that players can play this game freely, and that's totally fine. They've designed the game to be solved and handled in a very free way, very much like Breath of the Wild, but it sounds like they've gone even further in that direction. But also here, they're alluding to how they've paid attention to how players enjoyed Breath of the Wild and how over the years there were so many different discoveries of us accomplishing different things and breaking the mechanics of the game or the world, and they've built Tears of the Kingdom around that, which just goes to show how much they understand their fan base. And I think if you're a fan of Breath of the Wild, you're going to love Tears of the Kingdom. Towards the end of the interview, this part stuck out to me. Dota: as was the case with the previous game, the best case scenario would be for players to start playing at the same time. And when they get together later, they realize they don't know what each other is talking about because each of them is experiencing something completely different. Even though they're enjoying the same game, they're taking different routes, different things in their own ways, and when they ask each other how far they've gotten, each learns for the first time about what the other is playing. As was the case with the previous game, the best case scenario would be for players to start playing at the same time. And when they get together later, they realize that they don't know what each other is talking about because each of them is experiencing something completely different. Even though they're enjoying the same game, they're taking different routes, doing different things in their own ways, and when they ask each other how far they've gotten, each learns for the first time about what the other is playing. I hope there'll be conversations between players like, "I never knew there was such a thing," or "I didn't know there was such a place," again in this title. So the reason this stuck out to me is because he's speaking on the experience we had with Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild wasn't really leaked last I remembered, and we all got to start Breath of the Wild around the same time, and there was this constant journey and adventure and discovery that we enjoyed together. Because of the leaks, and everyone jumping into that, I feel that's been somewhat hampered. And when you consider how quiet Nintendo's been about this game leading up to release, and only now in the last few days really giving us a lot more information, they wanted to do their very best to contain the surprises for this game and let us enjoy the game as naturally as possible, as spoiler-free as reasonable, when we finally play it, hopefully around the same time. But this point here really just sort of shows what Nintendo was going for here. They didn't want the game to get leaked. They didn't want to spoil the game. They wanted us all to enjoy the game the way we enjoyed Breath of the Wild when it came out. They were trying to recapture that magic. And I think for the most part, that's still going to happen from everything we've seen. I haven't been that spoiled on the game. I've only heard a few little things. I think I'm still going to enjoy this game and enjoy a great many of surprises, especially with how dense they're saying this game is. But now this last part from the series producer, Aonuma. I wonder how many times I've played the game to debug it. I've played this game from start to finish about 20 times, and I can say that it's more fun with detours, even more so than the previous game. When testing the game, I sometimes needed to rush ahead to clear the story, but later on, as I started to go off on side paths, I realized it's a whole different game. Some discoveries made me think, wow, you can even do this at this point in the game. Even when sticking things together, there are so many different combinations that I even don't know all of them. I even discovered something new the other day while shooting the gameplay demonstration video. So it may take some time, but as you take detours and try out whatever you can at the time, I think you'll be able to enjoy the game in your very own way. So don't head straight for the ending. I've cleared the game many times myself and never felt bored once. You have my word. So a few things from this. He makes mention of heading straight for the ending. Does this mean that like Breath of the Wild we can go straight to the end? Or is he just talking about going straight through all the story stuff? I don't know yet. But he also talks about how many times he played through this game from start to finish, and it's a subtle way of saying, This game is very polished, but he also really hones in on this idea that every player can enjoy this game in a very different way and have a totally new experience. And that makes me excited for playing Tears of the Kingdom, because that was how Breath of the Wild was, but now they're saying that this might be an even greater version of that. And that has me incredibly excited for what's to come. I don't think it's hyperbole to say this may be the greatest adventure ever made. Will it be surpassed someday? I'm sure. Breath of the Wild was arguably that for a few years, and now here we are talking about Tears of the Kingdom, taking it to an even greater level. Pun intended. Anyways, everyone, this is Andres Restart. We're so close. Can't wait to play this game. We'll be talking about it soon. But that's all for now. Take care.